Black Ops Urbex. Don't bother looking up the thread. The website I'm talking about was abandoned and deleted long ago. It was a forum where adventurous people who liked to explore abandoned buildings could post pictures and share their experiences. The forum had the most dedicated members who logged everywhere they went with great detail, going as far as to include a rating system established by the group to determine things like quality of space, time required to explore the whole area, and safety risks. The forum attracted only the most passionate within the hobby. It was run by Team Black Ops, a highly committed group, some of which were ex-military, now turned into quote-unquote professional urban explorers. They would travel the country to explore only the most legendary and hard-to-reach places. Everybody on the forum wanted to join in on this exclusive team, myself included. But it was not easy to be accepted into their ranks. They needed to know that you could be trusted. I had been a keen explorer of abandoned houses for a little more than 7 months before I discovered the forum. Within this time, I was able to put together a list of essential items that always came with me. The bare essentials, of course. A flashlight, crowbar, all black clothing, including the bulletproof tactical vest that carries all this stuff. These are the practical tools, but the things that others don't bring are my most valuable assets. I would never enter anywhere without the must-haves: my obsidian necklace, salt, and slow-burning white sage. The sage can be in the form of either incense sticks or dry-wrapped leaves. Both are acceptable. And if I have both on hand, I will bring both. I also bring a labradorite palm stone which was given to me by a friend. She says it will bring me protection from spirits. She's spiritual like me. We both believe in evil places and haunted houses. There's also a short list of items I will never bring with me to an abandoned house. No guns, no knives. I have to constantly remind my anxious girlfriends about the turnaround rule. Never bring anything with you that could be used against you in a fight. They get it, but still think it's crazy I would rather put my faith in rocks and burning sticks when I could easily slip a pellet gun into my belt. I get their point, but once you listen to this story, you'll be as thankful as I am for sticking with my gut. So, how do you learn to trust a stranger from the internet that you've never met? You test their resolve, their commitment to the Black Ops Urbex forum. You could apply to join the team, but there were some rules. To start the journey of becoming a member of the expedition team, you had to be a member of the forum for at least a year. In that time, you had to provide proof of your dedication to exploring abandoned places by regularly uploading photos of your solo adventures. They had to be solo adventures. Courage played a big factor when considering new members for an exploration. If you couldn't face the dark unknown alone, you would never amount to more than a liability in their eyes. Even then, your application could get denied for a multitude of reasons. However, all the members agreed. There was one way to gain instant respect within the group and potentially fast-track your acceptance. Only one way to prove you possessed every skill and personality trait they wanted and needed to trust you implicitly. Find the red scarf at the Kidnapper House. It was described as a hardcore initiation for those brave and bold enough to take on the challenge. It was also treated like a bit of a joke amongst the members. Legend, myth, or wives' tale might better describe the scarf challenge. As the story was told on the forum, a red scarf had been hidden away inside an abandoned house. The house had many troubling stories surrounding the origins of the whys and the hows which caused its abandoned fate. Stories which argued with one another about the finer details of the killings that took place there. Yet despite the arguments, all stories agreed that the Kidnapper House was a damning and dangerous place to visit by yourself at night, I posted on the forum several times, asking for somebody to explain to me why it was called the Kidnapper House. They mostly ignored the question, except for one user who replied with, "You'll know why when you see it." At the time, I didn't catch how specific that choice of words was. The red scarf had never been recovered since it had been placed at the house, though many had tried. Some members of the forum never returned to the site after announcing their intentions to go looking for the scarf. I let my desire to join the ranks of the best convince me I would be the one to find it. In what had now become tradition, I turned down the music dial to a low thumping, barely audible rhythm over the noise of the V8 motor inside my Chevy pickup. I pulled up to the kidnapping house. I cut the headlights and slowly crept past the no trespassing sign and down the driveway lined with thick cedar hedges on either side. They erupted sky high into the night, obscuring pieces of the starry canvas of deep purple above me. Only the full moon's light guided me up to the porch as I disembarked the pickup. My tactical vest carrying all my essentials, right hand brandished a crowbar, and my left gripping the hilt of my flashlight, fastened to the shoulder strap, ready for action. "Anybody here?" I called out into the night. No voice returned except my own. My breath formed puffed clouds in front of my face and beyond, before dissipating into November's cold air. Complete silence. I was alone. Satisfied I wouldn't encounter any undesirables or disgruntled property owners, I felt confident to carry on towards the front door a few steps more. I say front door, but it was merely the hole where the door would have stood if it weren't so defeated. It volunteered itself to the job of a welcome mat instead. I sprinkled a thin line of salt across the entrance of the house before taking my first steps inside. The flattened door groaned beneath my boots, crushing any glass panes that hid beneath it, grinding them into smaller shards under its solid wood weight. The space was an endless void of darkness. Not even my figure in the doorway had the strength to cast a shadow onto the wall in front of me. I light my flashlight, and I'm glad I did, as immediately to my right lay an uncovered stairwell leading into the shallow basement crawlspace below. It was a trap laid by the house, waiting to grab the leg of a less prepared explorer. The door had felt a little shaky when I stepped on it, and it was in this moment I realized it wasn't the doorknob that kept it off kilter, but rather the delicate balancing act it played with the gaping hole in the stone floor. First impressions out of the way, I vowed to tread softly and give this place the respect it was demanding from me. I took a moment to calm my nervous system with a few deep breaths before continuing left into the main living room of the house. The intense light of my flashlight turned anywhere it touched into a patch engulfed in daylight. Long strands of wood lay bare, exposed from a lack of green plaster that once kept them hidden. The skin had been peeled back from her rotting body to reveal her skeleton. My torch meandered through the space as I followed behind it. A leather chair designed for a single person still sat in the corner of the room. It looked anything but comfortable. The cushions were sunken and wet, taking on the shape of sharp springs. The ceiling dripped with some sort of substance I cared not to identify. I prayed the tiles that had fallen, or remained hanging even lower than the light fixtures, weren't asbestos, though my gut suggested otherwise. In moments like these, ignorance is bliss. I slowly navigated the creaking, flexing floorboards toward the next room. Every step was tested before receiving my full weight. I gripped my crowbar lightly in anticipation of finding a silent resident who hadn't heard me from outside, or worse, had chosen not to respond. I shallowed my breathing and lifted my shirt collar over my mouth, so none of the little particles floating in the air could float into my lungs. In a way, I was glad I was being forced to take my time navigating each room. That way, there would be less opportunity for me to miss out of seeing the scarf. I delighted in the thought of being the champion of the red scarf. I pictured the selfie I would take. I'd hold the scarf up in one hand, like how guys hold a fish by the mouth on their dating profiles. I would even take the selfie inside the house, to add an extra layer of girl boss energy. Though, my smile didn't stay long, as I took my first look into the next room. It was even more of a mess than the previous room. Not a single square inch of the floor wasn't covered in clothes. It was a thick layer, too. Almost up the bottom of the windowsill in some places. I began to understand the challenge of the Kidnapper House, and maybe why it was called so. How would anyone find a red scarf, let alone the right red scarf, under all this mess? Some of the articles didn't even look that old. They cast eerie humanoid shadows against the wall. It was clothes of all kinds. Women's blouses, men's white workout shirts, casual wear, formal wear, sport wear. But most disturbing was the many, many pieces of children's clothes. It gave me chills to look at. I had to get out of there. I didn't feel comfortable anymore. But my desire to join Team Black Ops had taken complete control. There's no way I was going to sift through this mess. I convinced myself the scarf wouldn't be there anyway. It must be in another room. I noticed a closed door on the adjacent wall. A bare path meant I didn't have to traverse across the clothes to access it. I could instead slide against the wall parallel to the doorway I stood and access it. It was locked. This is precisely why I always keep a crowbar with me. I wedged the pointy tip into the seam of the wooden door at dead bolt height. Flashlight held firmly in my mouth, and both hands on the bar. It sank into the weathered wood trim as I applied pressure. The nails which had long played the role of gatekeeper to the secrets behind the door slowly began to retire under the pull of the bar's metal tip. A little kick off the wall with my steel toe boot, and the door shrieked loudly as the rusted metal snapped and wood came loose. It revealed a narrow stairwell leading to the top floor. I could see the familiar purple canvas of stars through a massive hole in the roof. There had been a fire. Not much of the wood supports were without burns. Wood fabricated from a time when 2x4s were what they advertised to be. Snow trickled in through the opening, leaving a slippery mess of powdery drywall rubble and glass slithers all over the stairway. I used my crowbar as a cane on my ascent up the stairs. It was just an empty room with a steep pitched roof. No bed, no red scarf. The wind howled through the gaping hole and smashed out windows. My cloudy breath returned to me, illuminated in the glow of my surveying flashlight. Maybe the scarf had been up here once, but the wind had taken it far away like it did everything else up here. The emptiness of the space served as a stark contrast of the room filled with clothes directly below me. I shivered or shuddered, unsure if it was the cold wind or my anxieties about the room below. It was time to leave. I felt I had seen enough of the house that anybody on the forums who knew the house well enough to quiz me would know my credibility. I didn't find the scarf, but maybe I would find some respect on the forum. Besides all the dirty laundry, Kidnapper House hadn't lived up to the hype. Most people let the stories of Kidnapper House stop them from even coming here. Or maybe they just knew better. It was a prank they pulled on new members like me. I fell for it. It was a joke, after all. But at least I had tried. I could hold my head up high. I turned around to face the stairs and chuckled to myself. Suddenly, a loud smashing from the room below. I froze. I turned off my flashlight and stood in the partially open air waiting. Waiting for what? I wasn't sure. My concentration rushed to my ears. They strained for clues as to what was occurring downstairs. Through the gaps in the floorboards, I could see a large black shape lumbering about. It looked it was struggling with something. A bag, maybe. Between gusts of strong wind, I heard labored breathing and what sounded like a woman's muffled cries for help. My adrenaline was on fire. I felt an urge to jump up and down in a panic. I wanted to scream and scream, to beckoning whoever was in the room below me to make their way up the stairs so I could swing my crowbar wildly at their face. Maybe I could save the woman's life, and we could escape together in my truck. But I dared not move. My own survival instincts knew better than to act on this hero fantasy. I could see the black shape move through the gaps in the floor. It shuffled around, examining every corner in the room below me. I crouched down to make myself as small and hopefully as unnoticeable as possible. My stomach turned as I heard a thudding noise under the wind. I knew in my heart it was the sound of fresh clothing being added to the hoard. I couldn't breathe again until whoever it was finally disappeared from view through the doorway I had originally entered from. Time felt it had ground to a halt. I couldn't tell you how long I stayed up there, fully exposed to winter's elements. My feet ached from supporting me, and my fingers were frozen to the point that they were barely usable. All my brain power was dedicated to listening for any noise that would indicate I could escape from this prison. I couldn't stop thinking about the sobbing I heard. The silence felt more and more like an invitation to run with every passing moment, and I knew if I didn't want to be the next victim, I had to leave. Now, in fact. One painfully slow step in front of the other, and taking extra care not to creak a single floorboard or crunch a single piece of glass, I headed towards the staircase and to my freedom. I pictured myself sitting in my truck with the heat on blast, smiling ear to ear while driving home with an incredible story to tell my friends the next day. A story which would include my heroic phone to police, alerting them of a kidnapping, and saving the life of a young woman. I could almost feel the warmth of the dusty air from the vents. Just a few more steps, and I would be home. I would never have to come back to this place ever again. Relief. Until a piece of glass on the edge of the stairs slipped under my boot, and I lost my balance. I fell hard and fast, crashing and banging down the stairs in a symphony of destructive noise. I lay on my back, dazed and stunned. Pain ran through my back and knees. My boot punched a hole through the moldy board and batten. Sharp pieces of wood dug into my ankle. My butt felt wet, but I couldn't tell if it was from the slushy snow on the steps or blood from every shard of glass and rusty nail I had met on my way down the stairs. It all happened so fast, including the screams of the woman in the other room getting closer. The thunderous roar I'd made from crashing down the stairs undoubtedly announced my presence. I saw a shadow appear against the wall of the room of clothes, signaling to me if I attempted to leave the house through the same way I come in, I would no doubt encounter the sinister man. I got up, ignoring the pain in my legs, and limped through a doorway I had not noticed before. I waded through the clothes to reach it. I could smell death in the fabrics, as I heard the man trying to find me, the intruder inside his Kidnapper House. The doorway took me into the kitchen. A hole had been dug out in the corner, leading down into the basement, and looked like sharp teeth surrounding an insatiable gullet. Several of the cabinets had been pulled off the walls, and broken plates were scattered all over moldy surfaces, frantic for an escape route. No way I was going to dive down into that hole in the basement. It looked like a considerable drop down to the muddy cobblestone ground, and my knees and back were already throbbing in pain. I turned my attention to the only window in the kitchen. The moonlight shone like a beacon of hope through the cracks of the wooden boards covering it up. I'll just swing through them with my crowbar, I thought. I reached for it on the loop of my tactical vest, but in my panic, I had left it behind on the stairs. My eyes flooded. I thought about the turnaround rule I used to assure my friends. I had lost possession of a large metal pole with a claw on one end and a pointed tip on the other. I spiraled, thinking about how it would feel to have a crowbar crack against my jaw if I somehow survived the blow. Putting my hands up would only result in broken forearms. I was completely powerless, and I knew it. Without the tool, I felt incredibly trapped. All I could do was kick hopelessly at the boards covering up the window with one foot. Each kick sent a sharp pain up my other leg, as it put pressure on my ankle. I thought it might be broken, but my adrenaline kept it working for me. My flashlight passed from the hole in the floor to the doorway, waiting for the crazed maniac to emerge. The light caught a glimpse of movement in the room of clothes as something passed the open doorway, but no light reflected off the pitch-black shape. Strange, it had absorbed all the light, the same way the dark spots do in mantis eyes. I turned my light off and stopped kicking at the window coverings, praying that I hadn't been noticed. I stayed completely still. I did my best to stay consumed by the shadows, out of sight. A small hand gripped the trim of the kitchen door frame with vigor. It was childlike in jet black. The female scream was the loudest it had been since I first heard it. A second and a third hand appeared around the edge of the door. I watched horrified as the three hands used the door as an anchor to drag a hideous mass through the doorway. Another hand appeared, larger and more masculine than the others, and the creature used it to prop up its shapeless head, which had begun to sag and droop as it fought a losing battle with gravity. Marbled eyes reflected a light source which wasn't present. I sensed their lidless gaze was transfixed on me, despite the absence of pupils. Within them, clouds swirled inside the beady bulges that appeared to be slowly projecting from their homes on the pudgy, Play-Doh-like body they desperately clung to. I could hear the beast's heavy breathing from my upright fetal position on the moldy remains of the kitchen counter. The noise came from a sucking hole. Every burdened and wheezing inhale was followed by an exhale that perfectly mimicked the muffled sobs of a young woman. The voice I had heard from the attic, the dying breaths of the last victim. I refused to become its next foul breath. Its timid curiosity shifted into an optimistic confidence as it revealed more of its fleshy bulk to me, inching closer and closer out from behind the doorway. The muffled female voice slowly grew into short, panicked gasps as the breath of the monstrous nightmare quickened. Frozen with fear and stuck in a dark corner, it was becoming harder and harder to decipher what in the kitchen was empty pitch black and what was the mass of the beast. The creature leaned in closer, its decidedly human arms propped up the bulky body. The milky particulates in the eyes swirled around like dust kicked up from a sandstorm. My horrified face reflected at all different angles in each one of them as it came close enough for me to feel its wheezing breath. From deep within the toothless orifice, the woman's screams erupted from its bowels. My body was as tightly pressed into the corner of the kitchen as possible. My feet would be kicking at the monster if I could find a way out of my paralysis. Even from my elevated position on the counter, this thing towered over me. Its head dragged along the ceiling, leaving a wet trail behind it, a stained smear of the unlucky eyes which had snagged on splinters as it dragged itself towards me on the myriad of awkward humanoid arms. It moved like it was learning to crawl for the first time, as if its own appendages were foreign bodies. In fact, I think they were. A horrid stench of rot was coming from the open hole the woman's voice wheezed from. The voice quietened, from a frantic scream on the inhale and exhale, to a calm whispering with every breath the monster took. I was bathed in the vaporous fumes of its hot breath. I knew I was going to die. But then, a flash of instinct. My witchy friend's voice came to me, soft but clear as day from somewhere in the back of my skull. She was answering my internal pleas for help. She reminded me of the essentials I always take to any abandoned place, the ones so many others make fun of me for. The physical world hadn't protected me thus far. Perhaps now I should fully put myself in faith of an esoteric solution. "Stop!" I yelled loudly at the creature. My voice was deep and guttural. I yelled how a captain might yell to gain control of a crew panicked in the face of an enemy. A voice of authority and respect. The creature retracted its advance only a little, but it was enough for me to gain the confidence to rise up onto my feet. "Stop! Now!" I stood on the kitchen counter, now in a position of power, looking down at the creature. The woman's voice roared from its lipless hole, but I hid my intimidation under steel nerves. "Shh! Not another noise!" I took from the front pocket of my tactical vest the labradorite palm stone. It basked in the moonlight which had returned to the window, the veins in the rock contrasting a brilliant mixture of blue, gold, and the shades between. The creature fell silent. I waved the stone back and forth in the air, and its body swayed with it. It and the stone were synchronized. After some seconds, I stopped the trance and fully extended my hand towards the loathsome mass, and offering it a closer look at the stone. My vision was blurry beyond the stone in my hand. I kept it in perfect focus, as the rest of my attention was committed to my free hand. I used it to fumble around in my other pockets, looking for my sage and a lighter. I was able to make out the black shape slowly rising from its sunken position on the floor. Found the sage. I slowly brought the sage up to my lips, trying not to startle the beast. I held it in my mouth like a cigar, and my hand went on another journey of pockets to retrieve the lighter. The black shape, he once again reached its peak height, meeting me face to face, but at a distance. I found the lighter and brought it up to the sage. I flicked it. I flicked it again. The flint sparked, but did not ignite the fuel. Female screams started again, louder and more aggressive with each exhale. The outstretched palm stone fell out of focus, and I put half of my attention back on the creature behind it, the other half working on the lighter. Spark, spark, but still not fire. Something was happening to the creature's body. Points were protruding from its belly. The points wiggled feverishly as they pushed outward from the body, fighting against the black membrane of oily skin that kept them contained. They were fingers. Delicate feminine fingers attached to a left hand. Acrylic nails were still attached to the tips. When it finally burst free through the skin, it made a sickening sound, and the wrist, forearm, and bicep slipped out effortlessly behind it. As the arm hung limp, it took all of my will not to gasp. I shook the lighter vigorously, hoping to get it working. The creature's interest remained with the stone for the time being. The newly emerged arm rose slowly. It trembled and quivered, discovering the full range of its abilities. I sparked the light again and again. I got a flame. But in my excitement, I moved too fast, and it extinguished before the dry leaves of sage could burn. The black hand reached out for the palm stone with its thumb and index finger, but it couldn't bring itself to touch the stone. It was as if the stone resonated with some kind of unseen force it found distasteful. My ears rang from the monster's frustrated screams. The hand gave up on the stone and reached for my wrist. The wet cold of its touch sent shivers down my whole arm and left a lingering oily residue on my skin. I let it explore up my arm while I focused on keeping the lighter under the sage long enough to produce a flame. Any sudden movements would be the end of me. I started to see smoke coming from the end of the sage. The creature held onto my arm tightly with 3 hands now, each exploring my flesh with great curiosity. The particulates spun inside the glassy eyes like tornadoes. I could tell it was excited to find such submissive food stumble upon its lair. It felt comfortable to take its time with me. The gaping hole in its body stretched and contorted, looking for a suitable size, I assume, with which to consume me. The extremities of the hole stretched out toward my hand. The 3 arms which held my arm yanked it violently towards the screaming hole. The mouth hole trembled around my hand. The edges of it quivered as they anticipated their first taste of my skin. The hand held my forearm with a firm and confident grip, but the monster acted shy, resisting its own urge to devour me. Perhaps it was savoring the moment, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, just as I was. The stench of death that came from within overpowered my smoking white sage. It yanked on my arm again, almost pulling my shoulder from its socket. I did not resist, and it pulled me off of the counter. As I fell towards its deformed maw, time lost all meaning. For a perfect second, as we came crashing down onto the floor, I was able to let go of the palm stone, using the strength in my wrist to toss it deep down into the back of the monstrosity's deep, endless throat. The blood-curdling scream of the young woman echoed throughout the kitchen and down the halls of the house. It ran from every door, window, and hole in the roof, finding its way into the cold, crisp air. If there were any neighbors, they would have been awoken from their beds and come running to her aid. But this house was alone. Only darkness inside and out. I got to my feet, not noticing the bits of china plate digging deep into my hands. Quickly picking up the smoldering white sage, the clouds of smoke billowing from its end were thick and gray in the moonlight. The monster banged about the room like a fish on a dock, crashing itself into the cabinets, choking itself as it stuffed its own hands into the back of its throat, trying to retrieve the stone. Each hand on an impossible mission, as touching the stone gave the beast an unbearable burning sensation. I waved the sage up and down, in the shape of an X across the bulk. It retreated as much as it could from the smell. It was panicked, defeated. In the moment, it felt safe enough to turn my flashlight back on to get a better view of the horrible thing. It was a morbid curiosity that I needed to satisfy. Once the light hit the monster, I was possessed with immediate regret. I vomited instantly, heaving long after my lunch and dinner was spilled onto the kitchen floor. Under the potent beam of the flashlight, the monster's black skin revealed itself to be a translucent gray. It was just translucent enough to identify the innards and entrails within, though they were not organs, but the naked bodies of the people it had eaten. I dared not try to recount the number of corpses. I tried to not to think about it. They were in various states of decay, from a few days to several months, all stuffed within the nightmarish bag of flesh. I had discovered the original owners of the limbs it had learned to use as its own. I turned off the flashlight. I couldn't let myself remember any more details than that, for I may have driven myself to insanity. My white sage was now giving off an overwhelmingly generous smell of burning herbs. As fearful as I was also furious. All those people. I marched up its quivering mass and blew the thick smoke directly into its loathsome face. The swirling clouds of particles sunk to the bottom of the eyes like mud inside dark fishbowls. It shrieked for mercy, and I had no desire to give it any. My lungs wheezed as I continually blew sage smoke in its direction, as I stepped out of the kitchen towards freedom. Feeling was starting to return to my legs as well. Both my shins felt like they were made up of two pieces of splintered wood, grinding each other into sawdust under the weight of my body. It was exhausting trying to stand, and when my feet hit the pile of clothes, I tripped and fell flat on my back. In that moment, they were welcoming, even comfortable. As the yells and screams of the deceased victim inside the monster echoed throughout the bones of the rickety house, I almost drifted off to sleep, replacing the noise with silence, drowning them out for a more favorable reality. I was almost ready to accept that I would never leave Kidnapper House. No way. I forced myself to hope, to believe that this was not the end of my story. I crawled backwards like a crab, no pain too unbearable to keep me from my goal of reaching safety. No deafening cries from the monster could distract me from my frenzied journey to the front door, even as they grew closer and closer. I couldn't afford to be. The sage burned my eyes, but holding it with my mouth was my only choice. I couldn't afford to abandon my only weapon, and needed my hands to claw my way out. I froze instantly in the harsh elements that twilight in November promises. My boots had inhaled mounds of snow from crawling across the wild front lawn. By the time I reached the safety of the truck, it had made its way in between the thermal lining and around my toes, so that I could no longer differentiate myself the ice cubes from my digits. I reached up for the door handle of the truck. My shaking index finger could barely find a grip on the latch, but it did reach the latch, and with the rest of my withering strength, I hauled my limb and sore body up into the cabin. Never had so much relief overwhelmed me before, as the engine fired up in a single turn of the key. And though cold, the air coming from the vents was most welcome. I returned to the forum to report my unsuccessful search of the red scarf, but I never brought up what I encountered that night. I didn't see the point. Being invited to these group excursions is a privilege only given to those who can be trusted to keep a level head. And frantic little girls whose imaginations create monsters in the dark would be considered a liability rather than an asset. I've been on several great expeditions with some of the most experienced guys on the Black Ops team since. I've been to abandoned factories, industrial complexes, mines, and ghost towns. I got what I wanted. I still struggle to understand if the trauma I faced was worth the confidence I gained. Feeling an unshakable sense of knowing that I can survive the depths of the most unwelcome places of the world has served me in all aspects of my life. I now freely maneuver the daylight hours of a 9 to 5 with an elegant grace few can match. Yet, my heart is heavy. Once the sun sets, I am a hermit, a recluse. My adventurous spirit has been dimmed and replaced by a rabbit hole which never stops asking, what else is out there, lurking just beyond our comprehension? I still carve out time and find any excuse to get back to Kidnapper House. Always in the day, of course. I will never step foot in the place again. But I try to peer in through the windows, layered with dust, for signs that more clothes have piled up in the room. I can never see enough detail to know for sure. I check the salt line and reapply it to the front door when it's wiped away. My heart always drops, knowing it's always been disturbed. Praying that it was the elements blowing it into fray, and not a person going in, or something came out. But I always redraw the line on the front door, and another around back, where there's a hole in the stone foundation that leads into the basement. And that's where I saw it. The red scarf, faded to a dark brown rag from time. It hung from the ceiling by mere threads, caught on a splinter. It swung lazily in the breeze, drifting in and out of the sunlight's beam and the pitch blackness leading deeper into the foundation. It scares me how inviting it feels. Just how much my morbid curiosity begs me to get on my hands and knees and crawl down in there, to reach into the cavernous unknown and grab it. But then, what may grab me? Unseen from the outside. Maybe it was staring out from the shadows, trapped from salt and slowly starving to death. Maybe it was dead already. I wish I could haul out its rotting flesh, to shine a light on it for both knowledge of the world and to ease my mind burdened with unshareable memories. But is such a thing even capable of death? Do truly evil things gain immortality, or does it exist only in my mind? It is uncertain, just like my fate if I ever ventured down in that hole. So I back away slowly, get back to my truck, and feel grateful I can once again turn away from that house.